On the 3 days after Christmas, from the Annotated Book of Common Prayer, edited by John Henry Blunt. The position of the 3 days after Christmas Day is a very remarkable one. Easter and Pentecost each have 2 festive days following their principal day, the Sunday. And in this respect, Christmas, with its 3 festive days, is placed on a similar, though a more honoured footing. But at Easter and Pentecost, the days are connected by name with the festival itself, whereas at Christmas they are associated with the names of saints, in addition to that continued commemoration of the Nativity, which belongs to them as to the other days of the octave. Some explanation of this may be found in the vivid convictions of the early Church respecting the close union between Christ and his people, especially his martyrs, through the virtue of the Incarnation. Eusebius speaks of the martyrs of Alexandria as Christophoroi, a name otherwise familiar to us in the story of Saint Christopher, and in the appellation of Theophorus, which was given by himself or others to Ignatius. And St. Augustine, in one of his sermons on St. Stephen's Day, seems to adopt a strain of thought in accordance with these names, when he says, as Christ, by being born, was brought into union with Stephen, so Stephen, by dying, was brought into union with Christ. There was, moreover, in the early Church, itself so familiar with a life of suffering, a profound sense of the continuous martyrdom which was involved in the earthly life of our Lord, both from the intensity of his humiliation, which he underwent in becoming man, non horruisti virginis uterum, from the Te Deum, and also from the sorrows which were inherent in his human nature as the bearer of all human woes. Hence they could not lose sight in those days of the fact that the Holy Child of Bethlehem was also the man of sorrows. And it is very probable that this view of our Lord's incarnation led to the commemoration of the first martyr, who suffered on the day succeeding that in which his Master had entered on a life of suffering, rather than on the anniversary of his martyrdom. In connection with this view, it is very observable that at the first taste of martyrdom, even before the suffering of St. Stephen, the Church pleaded the divine sonship and human infancy of our Lord. And although few of the apostles are likely to have known their Lord in his childhood, while his mature years and his final work were familiar to all, and his ascent out of their sight as man vividly fresh in their memory, yet they speak of him to the Father in their hour of trouble as thy holy child Jesus, and seem thus to fall back, so to speak, on the first days of the Incarnation more than a third of a century before, rather than on their recent knowledge of him, through whom they prayed for strength to do and bear all that was set before them. It may well have been that St. Stephen was among them when the words of that prayer were used. Another explanation is to be found in the Rationale of Durandus. The substance of this is that Christ being the head to which all the members are joined, 3 kinds of members are joined to him by martyrdom, as mystically signified in the Song of Songs, chapter 5, verse 10, by the words, my beloved is white and ruddy, and the chiefest among 10,000. The first and chief order of martyrs he thus considers to be those who, being baptized in blood, suffered both in will and deed. The second, those who gave their will up entirely to suffer, but yet escaped with life, and so accomplished a white martyrdom. The third, those who suffered but had no wills of their own to sacrifice to God, as was the case with the holy innocents. One other view may be named, which is that as the second half of the Christian year represents the Christian life founded on the life of Christ, so the 3 days after Christmas represent the 3 ways of suffering, love, and purity, by which the Incarnation bears fruit in the saints of God. St. Stephen was the nearest to the King of Saints in his life of suffering, St. John in his life of love, the Holy Innocents in his life of purity. The first trod immediately in his Master's footsteps of a martyr's death in its most perfect form. The second, lying on Jesus' bosom in close communion with him to the end of his earthly life, followed him closely ever after in his heavenly example. The third were the first fruits of that holy train whose innocence and purity admits them nearest to the person of their glorified Redeemer, so that they follow the Lamb whithersoever he goeth.